May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in our sight, your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. What if you were invited by a very good friend to go on a trip to a place you'd never been before, a place you'd always heard was beautiful and interesting, and many of your good friends were also invited? Sounds pretty good. So you're excited, you've made your airline reservations, packed your bags, and are ready to go when you receive these stipulations from your host, all necessary before you travel. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. Follow me. Suddenly, the trip seems cloaked in mystery. Does not sound so appealing. You find yourself on the telephone with Delta Airlines. Hello, sir. I've had a change and something's come up in my family. I need to cancel my reservations. Jesus said to his followers as they were about to begin their journey with him toward Jerusalem, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." As if that alone were not enough to rattle their already tangled chains, he then told them that if they wanted to save their lives, they must first lose their lives. No doubt, they were just as stunned by those words as they were in the lesson we read 2 weeks ago, when they beheld Jesus transfigured by a dazzling white light, and the prophets Moses and Elijah miraculously appeared before them as well. The disciples were simple fishermen and laborers who had left their work and their homes to follow Jesus just at the sound of his voice. They had become increasingly enamored of him, as well as awestruck at observing all the miracles he had performed. They had seen Jesus casting out demons, healing the sick, and feeding the multitudes just from a few loaves of bread and a handful of fish. They had seen him restore sight to the blind man in Bethsaida and later to blind Bartimaeus, just by his command and the touch of his hand. Just a few verses earlier, Jesus had asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" To which Peter responded, "You are the Messiah," the so-called confession of Peter. It was also Peter who wanted to build tabernacles on the mountain to house Jesus and Moses and Elijah after witnessing the transfiguration. He and the other disciples must have been beside themselves at that time, thinking that this new Messiah would become the next King David, one whose reign would result in prestige and power and dominion over the enemies of Israel. No longer would they suffer oppression, poverty, exploitation, and exclusion by the ruling authorities of the day. They probably felt pretty good about themselves and optimistic about their future and thrilled that they were following the next powerful king of Israel. And then Jesus dropped a bombshell on their parade with the information that he would suffer torture and death and would rise on the third day. In disbelief, Peter, the spokesman for the disciples, tried to tell Jesus that he misspoke, that surely these things are not true, whereupon Jesus rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan." The disciples were blinded by their misconceptions and their failure to comprehend who Jesus really was and what he was sent by God to do on earth. In contrast to the blind men whose eyes were opened by Jesus, these disciples were unable to see the truth. They were what one commentator called men of fear rather than men of faith. A pretty harsh but probably realistic interpretation of their status at that time. Of course, we all know that they would go on to become the founders of our faith and recognized as saints after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. Those words are directed at those who want to become the disciples and followers of Jesus. Like Peter and his friends, I wonder if sometimes we too are not blinded by our own prejudices, presuppositions, and preconceptions of the way things ought to be, by our desire to be in control, to maintain the status quo, to be masters of our own fate. The Lenten season calls us to look inward, to reassess our reasons for being, to determine what baggage we are carrying that may separate us from God's love and mercy. It is a time to retest our values and the things we hold to be true, and to be willing to change them if they no longer conform to the will of God. To deny oneself does not mean just giving up chocolate or a favorite dessert for Lent, nor does it call for any form of self-persecution or bodily harm. It does not condone the self-denial of women which has been imposed upon them by others who exert power over them in certain parts of the world. To deny oneself is to be willing to let go of control and autonomy, to cast off the cocoon of relative isolationism we have constructed around ourselves in favor of relationships and actively seeking the welfare of others. It means dealing with the uncertainties of life, of following Jesus to unknown destinations that could be both risky as well as life-giving. It means denial of the self that thinks it can survive on its own. To take up one's cross does not mean I have a cross to bear in the form of a neighbor who is chronically irritating, or a child who is a bit wayward, or a family member with substance abuse issues, or any other of life's discomforts and disappointments. Taking up the cross means not only dealing with the ups and downs life hands us, but also with the sometimes painful and redemptive actions taken when we strive toward the welfare and salvation of others. It refers to the opportunities offered to us daily in the small and sacrificial acts of love, compassion, mercy, and justice, even in the face of adversity and the forces of sin and evil in our world. We take up the cross when we are not afraid to answer questions about why we have ashes smeared on our foreheads, and when we feel emboldened to stand up for those unable to help themselves. We carry the cross when we realize when something is morally wrong and we do something about it, or when we determine that justice has not been served, or when we just take the side of the poor and the oppressed. The cross helps us point ourselves away from our own needs and concerns and toward those who are crying out for mercy, for forgiveness, for reconciliation. We need to take the cross with us when we leave here on Sunday morning. Carry it into our work week and into our homes. It is our symbol of discipleship and our desire to follow him, the Son of God. I'd like to close with two brief quotes, which I think reflect well on the gospel lesson today, and then a prayer. The first is from Fred Craddock, a well-known theologian and author. Quote, "Usually, giving our life to Christ is not glorious. It's done in all those little acts of love, 25 cents at a time," unquote. The second is from Ram Dass, an American spiritual leader and former Harvard professor who said, quote, "We are all just walking each other home," unquote. I love that little phrase because it connotes an image of holding hands, caring for each other, putting aside the self, and joining together in community so that we can walk each other to the home promised to us in God's eternal kingdom. Our prayer. Gracious God, fill us with the Holy Spirit and help us to practice denial of self and to take up the cross of compassion, love, and mercy, unafraid of risk or vulnerability, so that we too may become disciples. Amen.